Greetings, brave adventurers, and welcome to Community Day! That's right, I got inundated with stories after I complained about not having enough. You all delivered. As such, today I will be highlighting 3 stories from my community Discord server. So, grab yourself a seat around the fire, and let's dig into these stories of role-playing. Our first story today comes to us from the user Tiny Tiefling, the Archfey of Puns, and it is titled, An Hour and a Half at Underdenny's and I Didn't Even Get a Grand Slam. Have you ever been forced to sit around for a long period of time during a session just waiting for your chance to do anything? Well, you might relate to this one. Tale start. Around 3 years ago, I, with another DM, helped set up a tabletop group for people in my college's queer and trans services group. It wasn't always the smoothest, and there were definitely issues, from me included, but it was overall a fun table to play and run at. The other DM and I would swap off roles, playing on some nights and running on others, with not very much focus on story, so we each had our own characters to play when it was our turn on the other side of the screen. I decided to retire my first character and rolled up a nature-themed gnomish artificer battlesmith. Try saying that 3 times fast. They had a musket that was an old tree branch that shot acorns, and their steel companion was a wooden construct with the body of a bear, the legs of a cougar, and the head of a wolf, the horns of a stag, and a snake for a tail. That's a lot of animals. They wore a giant mushroom cap for a hat. They were going to be a chaotic wanderer who had gotten lost in the Underdark in search of mushrooms. The party was traveling through the Underdark to traverse the mountains that split up the continent, and was dealing with drow on their way through. They fought some powerful spellcasters and wound up with a good deal of money for their troubles. The DM for the session wanted to have them go to Fantasy Costco. DM is a fan of the Adventure Zone, to pick up some magic items before picking up my character at Underdenny's. This was discussed with me beforehand, and I came away thinking it'd take 15 to 20 minutes and then we could continue with this session. Quick context, we were playing in a campus building and got kicked out at 9 p.m. Sessions started at 6 p.m., so we had 3 hours if we started on time, which we never did. Nobody does, it's RPGs. Case in point, this session started a half-hour late because some people, including the DM, were late. So we had 2.5 hours to work with right off the bat. The whole encounter was role-played out, complete with Garfield the Deal's Warlock haggling for prices on sundry magic items. The DM had not prepared any cards or any copy-pastes to show to people, and instead of summarizing any of the item's effects, they would read, word for word, every single item description. They would also introduce items one by one. They also started describing the individual effects for cards from the Deck of Many Things. The Deck of Many Things was not for sale, or even in the store, but they felt it necessary to describe the card effects. This whole process took an hour and a half to finish and arrive at my character. The rest of the session was a brief encounter with an earth elemental eating Drist do Erden, I really hope I said that right. The DM hates the character, and one of the players who had just spent the majority of the session buying magic items getting into a disagreement with me because we both wanted one of Drist's items. They challenged me to a duel 5 minutes before we had to vacate the building, then gave up after 1 round of combat when they realized a thief rogue using melee weapons had no way of winning a one-on-one fight with a battlesmith artificer. Yeah, reasonable. The whole affair spoiled the character for me. I wound up coming back with a human champion fighter. It was the first event that eventually led to me quietly dropping out of the group. Tail end. Short one to get us started, and just unfortunate. I think what happened there is probably that the DM, who it sounded like was kind of new to D&D, at least a little bit, probably just first learned about all of these different items and was excited to talk about them, especially the Deck of Many Things. The first time I learned about the Deck of Many Things, I wouldn't shut up about it for a week or two. I must have been unbearable to be around. But more seriously, you should do some prep. Being able to improv is good, and you should be decent at it at the very least. But prep is important, especially for things like what magic items are available at a shop. Yeah. Moving on. Our next story is less of a story and more some musings on fun little world-building things. Told by the user AXB, it doesn't really have a title. It's just some fun and interesting names and world building. Tale start. Now, in terms of world building, a lot of DMs like to plan things out heavily in advance, whereas I come from the other philosophy, to intentionally under-prepare, to improvise important parts of the world whilst in session, and then to make those improvisations part of the historical canon. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm not recommending it as an approach, unless you're very confident in your ability to come up with good ideas on the fly. But I'm saying it can lead to a lot of fun shared moments with your players. For example, the party arrives in a town called Grenport. I don't know if that was meant to be Greenport. It was written as Grenport though, so it's Grenport. The only thing I had in mind was that it's the place where this world's first ever grain mill was built. So I say that there's windmills on the road into town, and water mills dot both sides of the river that runs through it. And then I figure that since mills are round, that circles would be culturally important here. So I say that all of the houses and most of the buildings are circular, not with the square angles you see in most normal towns. The party goes to the largest inn they can find, and it's called the Circle Inn. A large, well-lit main room with a central bar, rooms for rent on the upper floor, and precisely 0 corners, dark or otherwise. The, at this point mostly disliked, edgelord of the party lets out a dissatisfied humph, and everyone giggles. Aw, poor edgy boy doesn't get his dark corner to brood in. But the main inn they lived in for several weeks was called The Forgotten. There are 2 reasons for this. The storyline reason is, before they opened, they hired a sign painter to make the sign, then paid in advance, and he bought a few drinks the night before, and a few more, and a few after that, and got so drunk that he woke the next afternoon with a pounding hangover, an empty wallet, and only fragmented memories of the night before, and no memory whatsoever of what he was supposed to paint on the sign. So he painted, "The inn that I've forgotten the name of," which became known as The Forgotten for short. The IRL version of the story is, I improvised the name of the inn at the end of a session, didn't write it down, and couldn't remember it the next week. So I started the session by saying, "You wake up in your room in the inn that I've forgotten the name of, and go downstairs for breakfast." And when I couldn't remember it, I changed the inn's official name to "The inn that I've forgotten the name of." Wasn't the only interestingly named place in that town. Right across the square, there was a house of ill repute, shall we say. Now, I intended to call it the Peacock's Plumage, only somehow I got a mental block on the word peacock. I knew it was a bird, and I knew it started with a P, and I had the words pigeon and pilgrim screaming in my brain, and didn't want to say either of those, so out it came. It just leapt from my mouth, without even taking a millisecond to process in my brain. The penguin's plumage. It later became the world-famous penguin's plumage, because I decided that such a ridiculous name was too good to squander on something small and anonymous. Its storyline relevance was that the party was investigating a murder that happened in the alleyway behind, and the victim was a merchant from a long way overseas. So the idea that he'd intentionally visited this town in particular because of the famous gentleman's parlor seemed to have a sense of logic to it. Tale end, or musings end. Either way, this can be very fun, but I honestly don't recommend it. Even if you are good at improv, and I did literally just say that you need to be good at improv, you should still plan things. And also, if you're making up everything on the spot, your world loses a lot of its cohesion. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's all the same place. Also, you forget things all the time. If you make something up, like especially near the end of a session, there is no chance anyone's gonna remember what that is called if nobody writes it down. So just figure it out beforehand. And one more to go. Our last story comes to us from the user Silky Smooth Brain, and it's about yet another new player causing forest fires. Yeah, what can you do? Sometimes forests are flammable. Who knew? Everyone knew that. Please stop causing forest fires. Tale start. Ran a campaign about 3 years ago in our high school D&D club run by the library. I had to run a campaign for some newbies because our veteran DM already had too many players, at least 8 on average. So I took the newbies and ran them through an introductory mission I created in my own homebrewed world. The next few sessions would be some of the worst I've ever had to run through, but I was also young. So try not to hate me too much for some of the mistakes I made.
You will be brought before the Fox Tribunal for your sins.
The important players are as follows, and I'll just use their character names to keep anonymity. Oogway, Turtle Monk, obviously. The Problem Player. Brennan, Human Fighter, newest and shyest player, but the sweetest kid in the club and the only voice of reason. Lazy, Tiefling Warlock, downed every combat because she had 9 HP and played like a barbarian, wielding only a dagger. Illumise, Drow Red Dragon Blood Sorcerer. An amazing character concept, admittedly, but lacked the common sense to understand that trees are flammable. And Oberon, Elf Coastal Druid. Pretty chill, didn't do too much of note, but was best friends with Brennan. Now before I start, I'll explain that our first session was actually really good. I set up a prison breakout scenario where all of their characters had been convicted of crimes they didn't commit. An NPC broke them out, and they escaped tactically and easily. They had a lot of fun and were excited to see what was next. What was next was pain. Now that they had escaped, they were along the outskirts of the Greywood, a magically enchanted forest that houses all manner of magical creatures and plants. The Greywood itself is protected land, it being illegal to destroy any part of it, even if it would benefit a neighboring town. It was protected by powerful druids and centaurs that called the place home. They were fully aware of all of these facts. The druid, Oberon, knew all of this in character and told them all in turn, because he was worried the centaurs would come after him for being a rival druid. coastal druid as opposed to forest and moon druids. He drew up a crude map based on his knowledge of the forest and gave it to Illumise, who had the highest survival skill, in order to guide them through, noting important landmarks with a Nat 20 history check. Now, if you were in this situation, what would you do? I don't know, probably run off and cause problems? Read the map and follow the directions listed? I know I would, but what followed was just as shocking as the live wire that fried a squirrel outside while I was writing this. That is an interesting aside. The poor squirrel? Oogway snatches the map from Illumise's hands, finds which direction is north, towards the nearest city, and barrels through the bush at full force, clawing away at brambles, saplings, even young trees with his high strength score, in order to make an easy path for the rest of his party. Now, I had described the forest as being quite dense with foliage, enough to slow their travel to about half the normal speed. And they weren't being pursued by any prison guard, I made that clear. But that speed loss was apparently enough of an issue to prompt Oogway into smashing through the forest, if only to make the trip just a hair faster. So he's tearing the trees, destroying them ruthlessly. He manages to convince Lazy to help out, as she wields her dagger like a machete to cut through more swaths of plants. Wait, no, Lazy, no. A dagger is a terrible machete. Don't do this. Brennan and Oberon are clearly worried that this will cause issues, but they hold their tongues and let the two tear into the forest. After a few strength rolls, a band of kobolds take note of the sound and surprise attack the party, attacking with poisoned darts from the shadows. After a few of them go down, 3 Tressums, winged magical cats, if you're unfamiliar, they're adorable, explode from the brush and join the attack, aware that their forest is being desecrated. The party slays all the beasts and begins to keep pushing on, but Oogway stops them, approaching the bodies on the grassy floor. To this day, the following scenario haunts me as a DM, and is still joked about with my group. This next paragraph, and this next paragraph only, does get a trigger warning for rather gross descriptions of gore and similar things. There is a time code on the screen. It keeps you in this same story if you would like to skip. Oogway takes his hunting knife and proceeds to skin the once sentient kobolds and Tressums. Horrified, but allowing, mistake, I have him make some survival rolls to skin them at least decently. He fails pretty badly and manages to scrape off only a few pelts from the beasts. I very gruesomely describe the crunching of the Tressum's wings and the tearing of the still warm flesh in an attempt to shock him into backpedaling, but I think it only made him more excited to engage in his skinning. Yeah, it's kinda gross, my dude. When they finally reach the town of Redfield, a nice country-like halfling town, Oogway attempts to sell the pelts to anyone willing to buy them. He asks bazaar merchants, a traveling haberdashery, and finally a blacksmith. The female blacksmith is slightly appalled at the offer, but takes the best piece of kobold skin to use for some fire-resistant equipment for a measly few silver pieces, and even that is being way too generous. Now with one less pelt than before, our party heads into the woods in search of wolves, hearing from a passerby that a pack has been taking sheep from a farmer's herd, even managing to steal away the herd's ram. They soon find the pack deep in the Greywood, where the final conclusion to this horror story is. Unfortunately, this was one of my favorite encounters I've ever put together, but oh well. The wolves surround the party, each of them snapping at a party member trying to close the gap. Each wolf is horribly mutated, having hooved legs protrude from their chests, wool covering them in mangy patches, and the alpha having grown a spiraling set of ram's horns. They suddenly spring and make attacks on the party, bringing Lazy down in one bite and reducing the others to low health immediately. Ulamis manages to get many of the wolves in front of her with some careful movement, able to catch 4 of them, including the alpha, in a cone of burning hands. Unfortunately, Oogway, Brennan, and a dying Lazy were also in that same cone. She decides, fox it, and casts the spell anyway. The alpha makes its dexterity save, but nothing else does. 3 wolves and 3 party members take something like 10 fire damage, which puts Brennan under 0 and gives Lazy a free failed save. Now, because of the forest's magic, when any spell is cast while in the forest, it has a chance to go wild! Using a reworked version of the wild magic table, I roll. It goes wild. I roll on the table, letting everybody see the result. It's bad. Fireball. 4th level. Centered on the biggest flammable object. A massive ironwood tree goes up in flames, and I describe how Illumis's burning hand flame combines with fireballs and begins to rapidly torch the forest, reducing the sacred trees to blackened shells. The wolves run, and so do the party, without grabbing their 2 downed companions. Brennan and Lazy go up in flames with a large chunk of the forest, before the centaurs put out the flames of their home. The party made it home, but decided that they were officially criminals now, and wanted to make new characters. Now, if any of my party find themselves in the Greywood, they will find 2 graves surrounded by newly planted trees amongst a blackened earth, with Brennan and Lazy's bodies buried beneath them, as a little historical Easter egg. Tail end. Okay, what the fox, Oogway? That was almost some serial killer stuff right there. Ha. Maybe you just keep eyes on that person, just in case. That was not very Master Oogway of you. He would be quite disappointed. On a funnier note, Lazy seemed to be a good name for her, considering how often she hugged the floor. But also, what is it with new players and causing forest fires? This is the 2nd or 3rd story I've told where a new player caused a forest fire. Maybe don't use large area of effect fire spells in a highly flammable forest? Just a thought. But that will do it for this community day. Now that there's a nice supply of stories coming in again, we should be able to keep these up, because I love doing them. I love reading all of my community stories and telling them for everyone else to enjoy them too. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like the video if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so, ring the bell if you want notifications, you know all this, you've been on YouTube before. I want to also give a very special thank you to my first patron over on the FoxyBard Patreon. Thank you so much, Cintaria. If you would like to join, the link to that is in the description, along with the FoxyBard Discord server. And that'll end it for me. Let's douse the fire and get back to our own adventures.